How's everyone doing? Can you hear me? So, hello. Oh, come on. We got a full house here. Hello. All right. Well, I'm actually very excited to be here for the second year. Anyone was here last year? Couple hands? Okay, well, good to see you guys again. I had a chance last year and the privilege really to actually chair the event. That's actually one of the first things I said when I got up was, you guys are the eyes, the ears, and the heart of the organization, right? And that's your job and responsibility because we can't expect our senior managers, our board members to be out there in the front lines talking to the people we care most about, which is the relationship with our consumers. So that's very sacred, okay? So excited that they invited me back. I guess I didn't piss off enough people, so I'll try to do that today, okay? I'm going to be talking about my new book that when I came up last year, I said I started to write, and thank God it's almost done, and it's going to be launched in February. Give me a round of applause, please. Thanks. Don't write a book. It's really painful. Don't do it, okay? I know everyone's thinking of it, but really, no. Okay. Anyway, I want to talk about the reason I wrote this book, and then obviously about the book itself, but a little bit about the reason I wrote this book. Let's see, I get my clicker here. Good. Whoa. So the main reason I wrote this book is because I have been looking at many different companies, and I've noticed that, I was in charge of innovation at VF. Anyone ever heard of VF? A couple of you. Okay, great. VF is a large apparel and footwear manufacturer. Now, you've probably heard of some of the brands. North Face, Vans, Timberland, Seven for Mankind, Nautica, Kipling. I could go on. So you've heard of some of those brands. Is that fair? Okay, great. And my job there was sort of innovation. And one of my jobs was to actually infuse new ideas into our pipeline. And we were very fortunate. We got about $2 billion of innovation out in the 7 years I was out there. So it was a fun run. But part of the problem is I think I spent about $3 billion trying to get to $2 billion. I failed a lot more than I succeeded. And I was doing research to try to figure out why certain companies were much better at innovation, at commercialization, at the whole marketing, had insights and all that. And it sort of dawned on me that, you know what, there's a better approach to doing it. And that's what I want to talk to you guys about today. Now, just to level set and build some credibility with all of you, I am really an expert at this idea of failure. In fact, I have a personal scorecard on failure. So I'd love to share it with you guys. Obviously, a scorecard, KPIs. You guys are familiar with KPIs. So the first number, 4. This represents the number of career restarts I've had. Actually, it should be 5 now because this one probably counts as another career restart. But unlike what you're probably thinking, career restart, well, a recruiter calls you up and says, look, I'd really like you to try out a new function or maybe a new industry. My career restarts were all predicated on the fact that I sucked at my job and I got fired. Or I failed at a venture that I was trying. Okay, so that's what I mean by career restarts, okay? Not really a badge of honor here, all right? And oftentimes it meant that I was out pounding the pavement for 6 to 12 months looking for the next thing, all right? So that's what I mean by career restarts. And part of that is because I started a lot of businesses, and let's just face it, the majority of my businesses that I started didn't make it. Now, here's the hardest number. It's this. I've had to sit across from people that I loved, I cared about, that signed up for this new vision that we all had together and basically say, look, I'm not sure we're going to be able to afford your kid's tuition next month. What are we going to do about that? Real tough conversations. And a result of all these numbers, I've had many epic product failures, some in the multi-million-dollar range, okay, like tens of millions of dollars in terms of invested and not seeing the result of that. All right, so the next number is really a large number. But can anyone guess? It's actually a really small number. Can anyone guess what this is? Somebody probably saw this last year. Yeah, not a great number, right? Just so you guys know, that's the basement. You can't go below 300. It's kind of like the SATs. You take the SATs, and I think that you automatically get a 600 for putting your name on the SAT. Well, the same thing happens here. When you guys get your Social Security number, you automatically generate a credit score, and it's usually around the 600 range. And if you guys take student loans out or credit cards and mortgages, all that builds it up. And most of you are probably in the 700 to 800 range, and that's where the typical person is, in the 650 to 800 range, okay? 300 is the basement, and about 0.1% of the population achieves that. So you've met somebody, 0.1% right here, 0.1%, okay? I'm part of that 0.1%, not 1%, 0.1%. And guess what? I've done it twice. So you can guys go back, talk to your spouse and said, I made the biggest loser at the conference ever. That's me, okay, guys? Anyway, that's the motivation of failing so often and trying to figure out, is there a better way than what I did in terms of trying to run corporate innovation or do startups? Is there a better approach? And that's why I wrote this book, okay? So a little background. You guys, I mentioned that I'm in the apparel industry. And obviously, like all industries, you've heard of Michael Porter, okay? He has these generic strategies that most industries pursue. You're either a differentiator or a cost leader, okay? Those are the two generic strategies that are suggested that most companies pursue, one or the other. And generally, because you don't have enough resources to do both, you choose one of those. Now, at VF, an apparel company, here was the issue for us when we looked at Michael Porter's model. On the cost side, if we wanted to be a cost leader, we were facing new entrants into the market that were taking our lunch. They were kicking our butts. The Zaras, the H&Ms, the Uniqlos of the world. What were they doing? So they were producing the same jacket, the same shirt or pants, but they were doing it at 1/3 the cost. Now, that wasn't the hard part. The hard part for us to sort of compete wasn't the 1/3 the cost, because we had brands, okay? The hard part was they could take what they saw on the runway, basically turn it into a design, send it off to Asia, have it mass produced, have it shipped over, have it distributed through their system into their stores in 2 to 3 weeks. That was hard to compete against. And for us, that took anywhere from 18 to 24 months. So not only were we being out-innovated on cost, we were being out-innovated on speed. So this idea of being a cost leader in the apparel industry, it was being disrupted. Okay, so let's talk about differentiation. So if that's the area we're going to go to, I showed this slide to my board. And this slide is probably, I would say 1.5 years old now. And I kind of asked the board, can you name at least one row here? Can you name 5 of these new business models? And to a degree, no one can name it. Not one person, okay? All right? And guess what? Some of these are probably outdated. Some might even be out of business, and might be new ones coming in. By the way, who can name all of them here? Anybody? See? And this is the issue. When it came to cost innovation and cost leadership, we were being out-innovated there. And when it came to differentiation, it wasn't just the fact that we were being out-differentiated in terms of breakthrough product innovation. The harder part was we were being out-differentiated when it came to business model innovation, redefining what value was, redefining what the relationship with the consumer was, redefining what the ecosystem that involves the exchange of value to your consumers. That whole part was getting upended. So what do? On one end, you're getting out-innovated and nipped at the cost, and then on the other side, you're really getting out-differentiated when it came to business model innovation. So of course, we hire really expensive consulting firms, which you guys aren't, okay? You guys are like really valuable consulting if you guys are doing that, okay? But we hire, I'm not going to name them, one of those top 5 firms, right? I actually worked for one, so I can say this with a little bit of tongue-in-cheek. But we bring them in, what do they tell us to do? They tell us we need to innovate or dive, get on that new S-curve and find the game changer. Anyone ever heard of those buzzwords before? Okay, laughing. Yeah, okay, good, exactly, right. Now, here's the issue when you subscribe to this type of mindset. You look at your portfolio of brands or your products or your services, and there are things in your portfolio that are called your cash cows. You guys know what I'm talking about? The things that make all the money, right? They produce everything for you. And so this is your typical BCG growth share matrix. And no offense to the folks at BCG, I have a lot of friends there. But when I looked at other companies, they were thinking about this differently. Most traditional companies thought about this. You milk your cows and you feed your shiny new objects. All right, we've all been told this, right? And therefore, that's where all the investment goes, and you starve basically your cash cows. Now, when I looked at the Nikes of the world, the BMWs, the Apples, the Burberrys, all these other companies that were doing it very differently, they had a different take on this. In fact, the way they approached it, very different than the way I approach it, was instead of just milking the cows, they buttered them up. So instead of just chasing the new, they really went out and innovated the old. They innovated where they already had strengths, where they already had momentum, and where they already had customers. And in fact, not only did they innovate there, their goal was to make what they had, the old, as iconic as possible, as timeless as possible, with as greatest relevancy and longevity as possible. See, when you're not chasing after shiny new objects, and I'm not saying don't chase after some shiny new objects, it's just that these companies took a strategy where they over-indexed, doubled down on where they already had market momentum, where they already had distribution channels and customers who loved them, where they already had consumers who understood the brand and easily bought into it, where they already had distribution, manufacturing, logistics, all that fixed cost paid for, basically. That's what they did. And here's why they did this. When you think about it, if you look at this, these two sort of, this quadrant here, chance of success or cost effectiveness, if you're always chasing after shiny new objects, this is where you end up, okay? Very expensive, not high probability. But if you take your shiny new ideas, all the stuff you want to try out, and apply it against where you already have market momentum, this is the quadrant you're going to be at. Now, I know this is difficult because, look, I work in an organization where we had over 600 designers. That's just designers, and not product people. That's designers, right? And to tell them to work on the old, boring stuff, wow, that was a difficult cultural challenge, right? Everybody wanted to work on the new, fun stuff. But to say, look, I want you to do version 3.6.7, and we did 3.6.6 last year. Get excited about that. Very difficult message to give to your organization. But the companies that I just mentioned that were successful, they figured it out. They figured out a way to incent people to get really excited about working on the old. And in fact, one of the big learnings when we talked to Nike was this, and I was actually talking to my co-presenter who's going to be up here in a second, Peter, who was the CMO of Hershey's, and we were talking about this idea. And one of the reasons you do this, I'm going to let you in on a big secret about why you innovate the old. The champions for this idea of iconic advantage were not the marketing folks. It wasn't the product folk, and it wasn't the designers. It was actually the supply chain folks. Why? Because you're selling more stuff against fixed costs. And the biggest champions at Nike were the CFOs, the finance folks, okay? So if you want to go in fully stocked with all the momentum, with all the people behind you, go in with this strategy because you're going to get both the supply chain and finance folks to support your ideas. And here's why it works. If you're always innovating what you're already strong at, well, generally something that you have strength, something that you already have market momentum, something where you have volume and customers and it's a franchise, you're already going to have cost leadership. And the more you innovate against that, the more volume you drive against that, you're going to have even greater cost leadership. And if you're innovating there, guess what? You are increasing the gap between you and your competition around differentiation. So, Michael Porter, guess what? You can have your cake and eat it too by pursuing this type of strategy. Okay. Now, it's not just any type of differentiation. What I said earlier is it wasn't just sort of innovating the old. It was trying to make the old more iconic. It's iconic differentiation. So why is that so special? Well, imagine going to your first job interview, and your mom or your dad says, look, Grandma or Grandpa gave this to me when I went to my first job interview, okay? And I'm going to give it to you for good luck. Now, it might be inside your pocket, your purse, your briefcase. Does anyone carry a briefcase anymore? Anyway, okay, pretend you had a briefcase, okay? But you may never pull it out during the job interview. But knowing that you have that special item with meaning, okay, gives you a boost of quiet confidence. That's the power of iconic products. Iconic products have this other power, which they help us express who we are, what we believe, and what we care about, and what we want other people to think about ourselves. For the guys in the room, are you a Burke or a Birch? Okay, maybe not the guys, okay. But seriously, I went to Tory Burch, and I presented this slide to them, and I asked them the same question. And my assumption was that everyone was going to say, hey, we're Birch, obviously. And guess what they said? They all said to the T, it depends. It depends on my mood. It depends what I'm doing. It depends on who I'm with and how I feel about myself and what I want to communicate. But distinctly, when I put this one versus that one on, it's for a totally different occasion, totally different mood, okay? And that's the power of iconic differentiation. It helps us express something about who we are, what we believe about, and what we care about, and what we want others to think about ourselves. Another example that's less gender specific, but okay, maybe it's still a little gender specific, but imagine driving or riding a Vespa in Rome, and the feeling that you have, and in terms of sort of the be in Rome and that sort of Italian flair and feeling, versus being in the Midwest driving a Harley. Okay, both are perfectly fine, but you probably have a different sense of your lifestyle and what you're doing and about yourself when you're using those two different products. Okay, both forms of transportation. And that's the unique thing about us humans, is we attach meaning to things. The last thing about iconic products, they can even provide soothing and comfort when we don't feel our best. And why is that? It's because iconic products go beyond what we can see, what we think, even beyond what we feel, to a higher place of what we believe. Our values, our beliefs, what we care about. I think humans are probably the most interesting species on the planet in terms of being able to take an object and create meaning out of it, create symbolism out of it. A good example for me is we were visiting Como, in Italy. And we were there for, I think it was like 2 weeks. And my son, who was 6 at the time, lost his little puppet. He had this little puppet that he grew up with. It was a sheep, okay? And we couldn't find it. And so what did we do? We spent 2 days retracing all the places we visited. Thank God we did find it. But we spent 2 days out of our vacation looking for, literally, I went online and saw it. It was like $3, okay, on Alibaba. But for those $3, we spent 2 days of our vacation actively looking for a little puppet. Why? It was so meaningful to him. I want to share this quote that Steve Jobs gave to Mark Parker, who was the CEO of Nike, a few years ago when Mark just started in his job. So to paraphrase, cut the crap. We spend so much of our time and energy against the new that we forget to invest in the old. So that's what Iconic Vantage is about. It's about looking at what we already have, reinvesting a good portion, doubling down on what we're already good at, and trying to make it actually more iconic. So one of the first things to truly understand to make something iconic is what makes something iconic, okay? And through the research and looking at 50 different companies that did this, a few central themes came out clearly, and that was these. There's 3 qualities that lead to iconicity. The first is this: distinction. There's something about the brand, the product, the service, the offering that stands out versus the competition. Something that people can latch onto, take notice of, potentially create meaning with. Okay? That's first quality. The second is this: whatever that distinctive element is, it is meaningful to those consumers that you want to be iconic to. And it's not just about being relevant in a point in time. This is the key to being iconic. It's being iconic not only today or yesterday, but in the future. It's this idea of being timeless. Because the longer you are relevant for that distinctive quality and have that longevity, the more likely you are to become a standard bearer in the category for that distinctive relevance. And ultimately, to become iconic, you need universal recognition for that distinctive relevance over time to become the standard bearer. That's it. So understand that these are the three qualities. How might we supercharge your business, your brands, your offerings, your services to actually enhance these three qualities? And there's a framework we developed for that. And so we focus on three powers within your organization. The first is this: noticing power. When you look at your brand, your service, your product offering, are you focused on making sure that you have the ability to capture and hold attention? And once you have something that captures people's attention, you're not just different for different's sake. You are relevant with that distinction over time. So the goal here is to be timelessly relevant. Okay? So that's why you need to create staying power. Otherwise, you're just a fad. And ultimately, when you have great noticing power that drives distinction, great staying power that makes you relevant over time, you want to make sure that you're scaling that so as many people within the audience that you want to be iconic for knows you and recognizes you and acknowledges you for that distinctive relevance. And let me explain something here. This doesn't mean you have to be Coke. It doesn't mean you have to be, BMW. I work with a brand in San Francisco that wants to be iconic for pizza in Potrero Hill in San Francisco, and that's all they care about. And they just want to be iconic within that neighborhood. I've worked with folks who literally have 20 customers in the entire universe, B2B, okay? And so all they care about is being iconic to 20 people. So how might we supercharge these things within the businesses we have? I'm going to share some examples. They're a little product focused because generally the product examples are easy to understand, but these apply equally as much to service businesses and even to your own business. So you guys think about in the sea of services that you are providing, how are you standing out versus the next exhibitor that you have next to you? So let's talk about noticing power. So back in the 60s, we were in a race with Russia to get to the moon. And there was this NASA engineer by the name of M. Frank Rudy. I love that name, M. It's just like one letter, M. It's like Q, right? It's a great name. Anyway, M, he was responsible for protecting the astronaut's head from trauma. Okay? Now, he had certain constraints in terms of developing his techniques and his product. And one of them was obviously the suit's really heavy. It's also really bulky. So he was trying to create something that didn't add a lot of bulk and didn't add a lot of weight. And so what did he come up with? He came up with air pockets to protect the head. And it worked extremely well. And he thought to himself, wow, it works so well there. What might it do down here? Okay? So he went around and shopped this idea to everybody, including VF, and we all said no. And everyone turned him down except for one organization. Can anyone guess what that organization was? Exactly right. Now, here's the issue. In 1970, this was the first iteration of the Air Max, and it launched on the shelf. Now, going back to this idea of noticing power, is there an issue here? It looks like everything else, right? That's the issue. On the shelf, it didn't look any different. The only way you knew that it had an air pocket in its sole was through a hang tag or through the POS. And to most people, honestly, it felt a little gimmicky, okay? So it was a big flop. They brought it back in. They brought it to the Nike kitchen. And Tinker looked at it and he said, what can I do with this? And he decided to bring in some designers, and he gave them two pieces of direction, which, by the way, if you're working with designers, these are two directions you should think about. The first is he said this: we have this great feature that delivers a really unique benefit, but no one can see it. Can you make the feature and the relative benefit immediately and visibly obvious so I never need a hang tag, I don't need marketing, I don't need POS? Task one. Task two, you want to endear yourself to designers? Can you make it sexy? Those were his two instructions to designers. And of course, the rest is history. We all know this came out in 1987. Okay? Anyone around in 1987 when this came out? Ooh, okay, quite a few of you. Great. If you recall, this showed up on the shelf, and they were really smart because what they did is actually put a light behind the shoe. Because when you walked over, you actually saw light emanating from this little bubble on the sole, right? And I remember seeing it for the first time. I grabbed it. I picked it up. Obviously, I did the customary sort of bend it, right? But I also poked at it. And I did one other thing that most of you probably didn't. I sniffed to see if it was going to off gas, So anyway, it didn't. So this was very distinctive. So this had great noticing power. And the great thing about this, it had great staying power because it was highly relevant in terms of communicating the benefit. You see, most trainers will lose 40% of their support in their lifetime. But a pocket of air will never lose its bounce. Brilliant. So when you guys think about this idea of creating great noticing power, I want to use this analogy for you. How do legal entities, banks, lawyers, our mortgage brokers, how do they tell us apart outside of our social security numbers? This is something we physically do to help distinguish ourselves versus other people. Does anyone know? Exactly, our signatures, right? So when you think about your own business, you think about the brands you're working with, you think about your clients, what's your signature? What's their signature? Are you helping them understand their signature element? If I was to poll 3 of your customers or 3 of your clients' customers, just 3, could they say the exact same thing about you or your clients, and would it be meaningful? And if they can't, and the other thing about being meaningful, it can't be platitudinal, right? It should be specific and meaningful. So let's talk about this idea of creating signatures. How might you guys do this? Well, obviously, name and logo, but honestly, that's kind of like par for the course. And truthfully, that takes longevity, it takes a lot of marketing power, but you need more than just the name and logo. So how do we go beyond the name and logo to create really meaningful signatures that help provide distinction? We talked about this one, right? The idea of having a product feature, something on the product that really stands out, or a service feature that really stands out, okay? But there are other ways to create this. Style. When you see this checkered pattern, it connotes a certain degree of sort of English elegance, classic English elegance. And it's infused in a majority of the products, and it immediately communicates Burberry. But you can go beyond that. Who would ever think an hourglass shape would be the symbol of quality in Japanese restaurants for soy sauce? But it is. Think of other silhouettes, obviously the Coke bottle. If I said bottle with lime on it, would you guys know what that is? What is it? Corona. Okay? So this idea of silhouettes, can you own a silhouette? Is that part of your signature? Now, this to me is a bad example of a signature experience. How many of you have ever bought one of these, took it at home, got some scissors, opened it up, and then you still had to pry it open and break your fingernails? Okay, you guys know what I'm talking about. Well, another company said, look, can we take this and turn it into a signature experience? So Apple thought about this idea of an unveiling of a treasure. They looked at their products as treasures that you actually open like a treasure chest. How many of you have kept an Apple box? Over half of you. I still have mine from college. It was the original Macintosh box. It's very moldy and white, but it looks good. Okay, so this idea of a signature experience, what might yours be? You will more likely hear a Harley than you'll see a Harley, right? Okay? Or you'll probably likely hear the Harley first before you see it. And on top of that, how many of you have been to a Starwood property and gone in there and it has a certain smell that then carries over into the toiletry and carries over into the restaurant everywhere else? One more example about since we're talking about astronauts. Who remembers a drink when we were growing up that was the drink, the orange drink of the astronauts? Anyone remember? Tang. Okay, so they went out of business. Somebody bought that signature profile. Do you know who? Anybody? So if you miss Tang, go out and buy this, Metamucil. Yeah. So this idea of signature sensory. Signature points of view. You know, Red Bull's a good idea of this idea of giving you wings. All their information, all their collateral is all about freeing you to do crazy things, right? So these are all examples of ways to create great signatures for your business. So I want to talk about staying power. Let's stay with the Nike example. How do you create this idea of timeless relevance? Okay, so Nike has been relevant for 30 years with this Air Max. How did they do that, and how might you guys do it? Well, the first thing they did is they understood what makes them signature. What are those signature elements, and they protected them, okay? So one of the things I want you guys to think about when you work with your clients, ask them a simple question. What's your iconic signature elements? And they'll be like, a lot of them won't know. Can you create research to understand what that is and help them protect that? Job one. And why is that important? Because there's a certain degree of familiarity when you see that signature element generation after generation. That's critical. But you need to do more than that. You need to help them evolve their story and heritage. And the best example, and the why you do that is because everyone attaches meaning to things. Tintin's a good example. Tintin's basic character, his DNA is basically the same, whatever he's doing. But he goes through new experiences. He goes to new geographies. And through that, he grows and he learns, even though he's basically the same person. The only time I think he was a little bit different is when he was in Cairo and he was kind of had that James Dean look up there. But other than that, he was pretty consistent, even when he was speaking Mandarin on the next one over there. So help them evolve their story and heritage, or evolve yours own. The other thing I talk about, innovate the old. Nike didn't rest on their laurel. They started out in the back, and then they went front and back, and then pretty much the entire shoe. And remember the Reebok pump? Reebok pump could never catch up to Nike because Nike kept, every generation, they came out with something new and better. They kept innovating the old because that creates delight. We're all dopamine addicts, and so we're going to have to refresh what was the benefit. And the last thing they did, they didn't let the design stay stale. They continue to balance this idea of protecting the signature elements, but infusing the latest zeitgeist, the latest era, the latest fashion trends into their products, because that creates excitement. They did all these things, and when you look at all these things, it's a really simple formula. It's the ability to balance what's important from your heritage and from the old with the new. And it's that marriage that creates longevity for your distinctive relevance. Okay? Last one is this idea of scaling power. Let's talk a little bit about that. So, everybody know this car? This is the original Mini that came out in 1967. And if you guys recall, back then, it had great noticing power. And when it came out, it really fit the time period of London, right? London was sort of the swinging 60s and 70s. It was kind of the Austin Powers era, right? Now, the problem with that is, by the time they went out of business, which was 30 years later in the 90s, the main reason they went out of business is because they never changed the product. This car that came out in the 60s was pretty much the exact same product that came out in the 90s. They did not focus, they had great noticing power, distinction, but they didn't focus on the idea of staying power. Fortunately, this company went and bought them, okay? And these guys are experts at managing iconic franchises. So the first thing they need to do is figure out what are those signature elements and how do they protect them in the next generation. So they looked at the Mini, at the front of the Mini, and to them it kind of looked like a face. In fact, the headlights, the grille looked like eyes and a mouth. And for them, when they saw the face of the Mini, this is what came to mind. Playful, eager, alert, the gaze of a child. And so that went into their iconic brand language. On top of that, when they looked at the Mini, they said, it looks like a stacking. Like there's things stacking on top, one on top of the other. And in fact, it reminds them of a Big Mac. So this idea of the Big Mac was also part of their iconic brand language. Okay? Silhouettes, colors, shapes, these are all fed into their iconic brand language. And so you can see there, the eyes are in the middle, the stacked hamburgers right there in the middle also. There's 6 elements that feed into their iconic brand language, and that helps them protect and make it new. But they didn't rest on that. They obviously upgraded the power, the comfort, and style to improve its staying power. Okay? So they did all that to make the Mini relevant, but still distinctive. This idea of marrying the old and the new. And this is how they scaled. There are basically there are 3 simple ways to get universal recognition. One is through marketing, building awareness. The other is by making it available to as many people as possible. And lastly is obviously to take the iconic brand language and the family and extend the iconic elements so more and more people can participate. So let's talk about that last one first. Because they understood their iconic brand language, it was really easy for them to go into a station wagon, into a convertible. I think they have the new Countryman, which is a larger sort of supersized Mini, okay? And because they understood their iconic brand language, they were also able to take it into the lifestyles of their consumers, right? Into travel, into fun, into toys. Knowing their iconic brand language, what else did they do with it? They infused it into how they built marketing awareness. This idea of being toy-like, right? Being childlike. They also infused it into how they distributed it. Okay? This is the dealerships. You saw the roller coaster. You saw it packaged like a little toy car. So at the end of the day, they were able to take that iconic brand language and infuse it into how they did the staying power, but also how they scaled the product. So when you think about working with your clients, or when you're thinking about building awareness for yourself, are you changing your campaign every 2 or 3 years? Or are you talking about your signature elements and how you made them fresh, new, and exciting for the next generation? So one thing on the scaling verse, I already mentioned this to you guys. This works whether you want to be a global iconic brand or if you want to just be an iconic brand within a very specific niche, region, neighborhood. These principles work across the board. They work for products. They work for services. Okay? So next time you're working on your own brand, your own businesses, or with your clients, ask them, what is their signature that you can build great noticing power, build great timeless relevance, and make as many people recognize you for it as possible so that eventually, through time, you become the standard bearer for that signature. Thank you guys for your time.